is a D6 generation pip. Yeah, one of those dots on the side of a six-sided die. Yeah, a pip, a short pip, little something. About anything gaming related. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ. We'll see what's coming up today. Howdy, everyone. Excited to be here for another D6 Generation Pip. Again, trying to do our new approach here with having new D6G content every Sunday. That's right, Sunday is D6G Day. Also going to try to alternate things a little bit so that every other Sunday is a single segment. So you'll still be getting a lot of the segments a month. They'll just be coming once a week. And also we're going to try to alternate between a D&D segment and then a different kind of gaming segment. A live play segment versus something else. Might be about D&D, but in the mechanics of the game, but probably it's going to be other topics. Like today, I want to chat with you about a new game I got. It's still new to most folks. It's still new to me also. But I've had it for a couple months now, and that is Galaxy Hunters. I backed the Kickstarter on this thing a little while ago, and it finally came in a few months ago now, and I've been playing it. I've put some pictures up on the social media pages there on our D6G feeds. A lot of folks have been asking for a little review here, so I thought I would jump in and review it. Craig is out and about, so it's just me today, so hopefully I can do this a good D6G review justice here for Galaxy Hunter. So I'm going to jump right in. So first of all, now when I backed this thing, I kind of backed it all the way, so I ended up getting 3 boxes of goodies. I got the Galaxy Hunters core game. There's a expansion called Galaxy Hunter New Ways to Hunt. Now, both of those are available today. You could order them online at various retailers, plus your friendly local gaming store might have them. These are both by IDW Games, so they're out and around there. I would definitely recommend getting both the core game and the New Ways to Hunt expansion from the beginning. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So if you see both those things together, just go ahead and buy both of them if the game interests you. So what is the theme? What's this all about? Well, here's the basic theme. I'm not going to read the entire thematic paragraph because Craig's not here to give it the really good justice, but I'm going to jump right into the sort of the back half of the description of the game that kind of tells you everything you need to know. In Galaxy Hunters, 2 to 4 players take on the role of mercenaries hired by megacorps to hunt down and harvest the rampant mutants. Featuring an innovative pilot mech neural link system, pairing different pilots with different mechs will unlock new powers and special abilities. That's right, it's basically Pacific Rim in space. You heard it. Using money and resources earned for bartering with planets and harvesting DNA from creatures, players will upgrade their mechs. And with new weapons and items, Galaxy Hunter seamlessly blends the excitement of crafting a unique character with the deep strategy of Eurogame-style worker placement. That's exactly right, actually. They did a really good summary on that. The theme is what got me and when I bought this game. A couple things on the Kickstarter. You can see they have some really cool sculpts of all the various mechs. So you're basically mechs, and you're pilots of these mechs, and you're all going to go out there and fight monsters. And the game board is really it's sort of a galaxy. It's space with different planets. And your team, the things you're in control of, really consists of 2 things. First of all, your giant plastic cool mech sculpt, along with some wooden, they call them agent ships. So basically, spaceships that'll fly around and do things too. So basically each turn, you're going to do something with your giant mech and you're going to do something with your spaceships. And as the game progresses, you'll get a few more of these little spaceships. You're going to have 3 or 4 or potentially more activations a turn, depending what you do or around. The goal of the game is to collect essentially victory points. And like any good game, there's going to be a variety of ways to do that. But the real cool part of the game, the real core mechanic, and you kind of heard it in the intro, is this idea that you're sort of leveling up and building your character, your pilot, as well as your mech combination. Now, what makes this game really interesting and gives it a lot of replayability is that the game comes with these really cool sort of hexagonal tiles. And these tiles are basically centered around the mechs, and there's one tile for every mech, and is matched by a plastic cool mech you get to put on the game board. But then also, there are these sort of semi-hexagonal pilot tiles that connect to the mechs. And these pilot tiles have iconography on them that tell you what their skills are. But there's also iconography on the edge of the mech tile. So when you put these two things together, they kind of slide next to each other on the game board. So you're not on the game board, but on a place in front of you. So kind of your player mat, if you will. You're going to have this large game board. Then you're also going to have a player mat that's really a two-part mat. It's your mech and it's your pilot, and they slide together. And the way they slide together, your mech is going to point to two of the abilities of your pilot. So even though your pilot, when you're picking your pilot, there's these, four different abilities they could have. The mech you choose is going to reduce your pilot abilities down to two. Now, there are some ways you can unlock some of your other pilot abilities, but basically, really cool replayability here because each mech is a little different, but then each pilot is different, and then the pilot mech combo together makes it different as well. Kind of the way Small World sort of works with your either intermediate factions, but you're going to be joined with this mech and this pilot for the entire game. Does that make sense? So let's jump in and look at the rule book here. I do like to give a little rule book reviews. First of all, rule book, full color. It looks a little intimidating at first. It's like 31 pages, but really a lot of the pages are dedicated to sample turns and going through a lot of different permutations of the different definitions of cards and tiles. Everything really is covered with iconography in this game. And once you kind of learn the iconography, it's pretty straightforward. The other thing about the game that is going to be a little intimidating and probably going to it might turn you off when you first look at it. And it definitely turned me off when you first look at it. So one of the things about the game that's interesting is it is a resource collecting and spending game, right? So at its core, this is a worker placement game. You're going to be taking your spaceships, your little wooden spaceship tokens, and your giant cool plastic mech. And each round, one player is going to place one of these, and then another player is going to place one. And you're going to go around the table until everybody's placed all of their spaceships and or their mech. And you can choose which order you're going to place these things. And there are different placement locations in the galaxy. There are little icons in orbit around each planet. Those are accessible by your little wooden spaceships. And then the planet itself, as an icon, can be placed, your mech can be put on world. So basically, the planets can be activated by putting your mech on the world, and the planet can also be activated by putting your ship in orbit. And next to the planet, there's iconography that explains what you get if you put a ship or a mech there. Interestingly, the planet activates the same whether or not there is a mech or a ship being placed, but the difference is there are a limited number of orbital docks based on the number of players in the game. So you'll see little iconography next to those orbital placement spots. So in a two-player game, there's less orbital places you can place. So if I put my ship there, I might block out one of the other players from using that planet, but they could still put their mech on there. Now, also a thing to remember is only one mech can ever be on a planet at a time. So you're going to have to think carefully. Now, the other thing to think about is there are these giant biomutants you get to fight, and those biomutants can only be fought by your mech. So you kind of want to choose carefully where you use your mech, because you're going to want to obviously fight lots of biomutants, because that's where the real victory points get scored. Although there are many places to score victory points. But I mentioned before I get to the victory points, which you definitely always want to share how you win these games, I will mention the one component that might turn you off. I think the rulebook looks great. It's full color. It's got a nice table of contents. It's got a nice quick reference on the back. So that's fine. But when you look at the quick reference on the back, you're going to notice that there's a quick reference guide for all the different resource tokens. And the thing that might turn you off is when you look at this, it's not just one resource in the game, or two resources in the game, or even three resources in the game, or even five resources in the game. No, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different resources that you're going to track in this game. And the thing that's a little intimidating about it is there is this resource tracker board. And so your player area is going to consist of a couple things. It's going to consist of the mech hex symbol I talked about, and you're going to interlock that with your pilot. And then you're also going to have this giant resource board that's a little bit of a table hog. It's pretty big. And it's not honestly the most beautiful thing you'll ever look at. It's basically a giant black square with the numbers 1 through 30 on it. And under each number, there's a bunch of little spaces sort of bracketed out where you're expected to put the resources tokens. So you basically take all these different 10 resource tokens, and there's a bunch of tokens in the game box, and you take them out, and each player is going to line up all the different types of resource tokens, and they're all different colors, and they've got sort of these sort of interesting little, like, they're not quite Greek letters. They're sort of these fancy sci-fi letter systems. But in any case, you're going to line these all up under the 0 for 0 resources at the beginning of the game. And then as you acquire resources by placing your ships and your mechs on the planets, you're going to move them up and down on this track. Now, the first thing you're going to think about is, well, it takes up a lot of table space. Why don't you just collect tokens? But when you have 10 different resources, having 10 different piles of different kinds of tokens would have been a bit messy. The second thing I will say is you do live in constant terror that one of the players is going to knock their resource board and send the resource tokens flying everywhere and forget where the value of all your different resources are. This drove me crazy. So I ended up making a slight modification to my game after I played it a couple times and realized I enjoyed it enough to make this modification. And that's it. That is, I went out and I found some very small ferromagnetic washers. And be careful when you buy some washers at the hardware store, they're not magnetic. So make sure you test them with a magnet. Make sure they're magnetic. Usually the ones with zinc are magnetic, by the way. I got a bunch of small washers. I went and looked and saw the size of the tokens. I brought a token in and held it. A box of 100 washers is like $2, so it cost me nothing. And I glued all these washers to the back of all these tokens. And then I went out and I found some magnetic tape. It basically looks like Scotch tape, but it's magnetic. It's not super cheap, but not too bad. And then I cut it, and it's sticky on one side. So I cut it and I stuck it in little strips under each of these numbers on these boards. And then what happens is now these tokens just magnetically stick to the boards. It's actually good for a couple things. One, you can magnetize all your tokens to the boards for storage, but also as players are moving this around, you can now knock the boards and the tokens don't go flying everywhere. So there's a way around this. Here's the good news, though. It actually works, except for the problem of constantly living in fear of knocking the board and sliding them everywhere and having to kind of bodge together a solution. It's actually a much faster way to track your resources and move them up and down and spend them than would be to take tokens, go back to the supply, wherever it is, and hand them out to each player. So it's actually a pretty, from a practical point of view, it's very effective and pretty clever. From a aesthetics point of view and, oh my God, someone's going to knock the table point of view, that's the one weakness in the game, I would say. Everything else, though, components look fantastic. The mechs are cool. The wood's cool. The token quality's fine. The board art is great. And all the card art and the different hexes are also really cool art. Because the other big component you're going to find in the game is there's dozens of these really nice tile hexagons. And when you set the game up, this game is such a table hog. I mean, it is a total table hog. You're going to need, I use my 4x6 miniature gaming table for this, and it pretty much takes up the whole thing, just to give you an idea. So this baby is a mammoth, right? So because not only does each player have this kind of big area they're using with, their mech, their pilot, their giant resource tracker board, all the resources on it, that's their stuff. But then in addition to that, the game board itself isn't overly huge, but it's a pretty good size. But on the periphery of the game board, there are all these little icons set up there that's meant for you to set up the markets. And the markets are mostly these different cool hexagonal tiles. And each of these tiles falls into different kinds of categories. Some of them are weapons. Some of them are pilot skills. Some of them are upgrades for your mech. And so these things have got to be distributed into the right spots, because when you go to certain planets and activate them, right, it's going to allow you to buy certain kinds of tiles. And so you're supposed to be able to look out at your giant game board with all these tiles spread around it and say, oh, I want to buy that one. So I'm going to go to this planet, which lets me buy that tile type. And then I've got to have the resources to get the tile, and then I get to take it. The reason these things are all sort of cool tiles is they lock in around your mech. So you're actually attaching these sorts of things. So you're kind of imagining you're attaching your weapon to the mech's shoulder, or putting it in his legs or near his arm, or you're putting this upgrade on the side. And what's really interesting about this is there is also a diagram on your pilot's tile that says, if you want to get a bunch of bonus victory points, you'll need to have certain kinds of upgrades in certain kinds of slots for your mech. Basically, your pilot has a fighting style, and he wants you to kind of equip your mech to match your pilot's fighting style, which is pretty interesting. So really kind of cool there too, and it's a really cool mechanic, but it takes up a ton of space because you've got not only the game board and all these huge player tiles, but now you got all these hexagonal tiles spread out, like shooting off the side like giant wings of your game board, making this thing huge. But it is glorious when you've got it all set up, but you do need a big table. So just be prepared to set all that up. The good news is the game doesn't play super long, and you're going to spend most of your time getting all your stuff organized and set up. It's probably about a 2-hour game experience with four players. So it's not too hefty. So anyway, get all this set up and you're ready to begin. Now, really, the thing to the game to remember, how do you win this thing? Well, it's really all about victory points. And it looks like there's a victory point tracker on the board, but there actually isn't. It's actually a influence track. So as you do certain things, you will gain influence with certain this little influence board. And as you pass certain points, you'll get additional victory points. So the way you can kind of see all the different victory points you can gain, what you want to do is look at the back of your quick reference card. They're all in there. But you look around the board for anything with basically stars on it. And anytime you see a star with some numbers in it, that's going to give you victory points. Some of the upgrades give you victory points. Completing your pilot's preferred loadout gives you victory points. But the big thing that gives you victory points, there are basically commissions, essentially, that come, they're called mission cards, but I like to think of them as commissions that the Megacorps want. So the fluff of the game is you're this giant mech, right? And there's these giant biomutants running around, kind of Pacific Rim-y, attacking the various planets, all right? Actually, most of them live on this one particular planet you can go to fight mutants, but every once in a while they'll jump out and attack the rest of the galaxy. More about that in a second. So when you fight these mutants, you hope to beat them in combat, and when you do, you will collect a DNA type that matches that mutant. That's right. It's an additional resource, and they don't count as one of the 10 I was tracking earlier. Those things actually are tokens, right? So when you kill a mutant, you're going to get some DNA, and these missions cards you're going to see, they're going to have different DNA icons on them. And if you can collect the right combination of DNA icons, sometimes it's 4 of the same or 3 of the same. Sometimes it's one of each, 3 different colors. Sometimes it's a little bit of all 3, whatever it is. You're going to get some points on the bottom there. So the biggest way you can collect victory points is by fighting mutants, getting their DNA, and then turning their DNA in for mission cards, which gives you a lot of points. Plus, every bit of mutant DNA is always worth 1 victory point, but you can spend it to solve your mission card, which is usually worth a few more. So just killing aliens and collecting DNA is good, but turning it in for missions usually it's not really a force multiplier, but it adds 2 or 3 more to what the DNA would be worth than by itself. So definitely something to keep an eye on. The other big way you can get victory points is as you progress throughout the game, there is a particular upgrade type of tile that slots into your mech. And this will give you pretty significant bonus victory points if you happen to achieve those sorts of things. So being the highest rank on the influence track, for example. These are common in these kinds of games, right? It's sort of like if you've been playing a certain play style, you can get bonus victory points for having done that, right? So keep an eye on those as well. And then, as I mentioned, some of the upgrades just give you some victory points just for having them. So keep an eye on that too. So watch those tiles for those. But the big way, the engine you're going to want to build is basically a Mechs layer. And to do that, you're going to need weapons. And to do that, you're going to have to understand how to fight. And to do that, you're going to have me explain that to you. So here we go. So combat's the most fun part of the game, I think. And this is also the reason you definitely want to get New Ways to Hunt expansion. As a longtime listener of the D6 generation, you will know that we like our dice. Dice is our vice. And in fact, the name of the show implies that we really like D6s. Well, turns out if you don't get the New Ways to Hunt expansion, there are, wait for it, no dice in the game. I know, it's terrible. It's a diceless game. Now, if you're someone who does not like dice and you prefer to have virtually no luck in your game, well, you're in luck, because if you choose not to use the New Ways to Hunt expansion, you have absolutely no dice, and you're just going to compare some combat stats information about your mech against a monster, and you're either going to take some damage and you're going to win, or you're going to take some damage and you're going to lose, and that's pretty much it. So let's talk about how combat works dicelessly for a minute. And then I'm going to talk about why the only way to play this game is with New Ways to Hunt, because it adds dice. And who doesn't like dice? Those of you who don't like dice, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry for you. You're just not experiencing life the way it was meant to be experienced. So moving on, here's how combat works. So there are basically, remember if I mentioned to you earlier that when you connect your mech to your pilot's got all these skills, and your mech's going to enable a couple of these skills. That's fantastic. However, your mech itself, though, also has these little glowing cube areas on the bottom of its card. And the numbers and the colors of the cubes is going to be different depending on your mech. Now, the 3 different colors there's energy, which is blue. There's health, which is blue, which is basically your structure damage, or shields, I think it is. Let me see. Let me see what they call. Oh, yeah, here it is. Yeah, armor is blue. There we go. Armor is blue. So when you're out of armor, bad things happen. You're never really killed in the game, though. That's the good news. If you need energy to fire your guns, so another one of the cube colors is energy. It's green. And then the third cube color is red, and it is ammo. Now, if you're using the New Ways to Hunt expansion, you will have another side that slots on the other side of your mech, which will add a fourth cube resource type. Yes, now we've added, actually, there's the 10 core resources in the game. There's the DNA resources, and now there's actually cubes as well. And there are 4 different colored cubes if you use the expansion. Oh yeah, baby. If you like to manage stuff, this is the game for you. So there's all these little cubes. As I mentioned, the blue cubes are armor, the green cubes are energy, the red cubes are ammo, and the translucent orange cubes are reroll cubes that you can use if you have the new expansion. But of course, you don't need those if you have no dice, right? So how your mech works is it's got slots on the bottom of its card, or little spaces there for cubes to be placed. And at the beginning of the game, you're going to fill up all the armor with the armor blue cubes, and all the energy with the energy cubes, and all the ammo with the ammo cubes, right? So you're ready to go. Now, if you want to have larger numbers of those, you're going to have to buy upgrades that attach to the outside of your mech that'll also have these cube icons on it, which allows you to put more cubes in there, right? So when you fight, what you're going to want to do, there are weapons, okay? And these weapons, you'll have to bought a weapon. So when you start the game, you have no guns, no armaments, nothing. So the first thing you're going to want to do is look for some cool guns you want to get. Sometimes the gun you want to pick is going to be based on some of the skills of your pilots, because some pilots will give you bonuses for certain weapon types. So look at your pilot, figure out what weapon types he or she seems to enjoy, or it, because there are some strange-looking alien things that are definitely not gender specific. So look down this list. See if there's any ammo, specific weapon types you need. Look at the guns available. You're going to see that to go get that gun, it's going to cost you some resources at the planet, which allows you to buy weapons. So what you're going to want to do first is go to the planets to get the resources you need to go buy your first weapon. Now, there is a limited number of these weapons in the market, and they're all face up, as I mentioned, because this thing is a table hog. So you're going to want to be eyeing your other players and seeing if folks are going for the same gun you want, and maybe you're going to have to fight over. There are duplicates of certain weapon types, so you might be okay, but that's something to keep an eye on. So go get yourself a weapon, first of all. Now, when you're considering your weapons, this is where you have to understand the cubes and the combat. So the weapons are going to have on them, they're going to have a couple things. They're going to have iconography that tells you how much damage the weapon deals. And there are also going to be iconography on there that tells you the cost of firing the weapon, right? So it's going to have icons that tell you the energy cost. Some weapons require energy. Some weapons require ammo. Most weapons require a little bit of both. Melee weapons, like energy swords and stuff, which are super cool, require only energy and no ammo. And some guns are pure ammo and no energy. So it's a combination of that, right? And so you're going to have to figure that out. But those two things are two resources your mech has, right? The green cubes are energy. The red cubes are ammo. So the way fighting works, super simple if you're not using the expansion. So you're going to be looking at a monster. And what's also interesting is on one corner of the table, there's sort of this planet where all the war occurs, right? Where most of the biomutants hang out. And there's going to be 4 of them over there face up. So as your activation, you can pick up your little plastic mech and put it over there on that planet. And then you get to pick one of the face up biomutants and you say, I'm going to fight that guy right there, right? Now these biomutants are all going to have different 2 primary stats in their card. They're going to have some cool artwork, and they're going to have an icon that tells you what its DNA type is, which is important when you're trying to solve certain DNA missions. You're going to want to know what that is. And you're going to see these 2 different icons below the DNA, right next to the cool biomutant art. You're going to see a number next to crossed swords, which indicate how much damage the monster does, 2, 3, 4, whatever it does. And you're going to see a number next to a shield, which indicates how much damage you have to deal to slay the mutant. And again, it's usually 2, 3, 4, or something else. Sometimes they're 6. Sometimes they can be very large. So what you're going to do, you're going to go after this mutant. I'm fighting this mutant. Now, if you're playing the base game, all you do is you decide which weapons you're going to activate. And you can activate all of your weapons once per combat, as long as you can afford the energy cost and the ammo cost. So you're going to discard the energy and ammo cubes necessary to get enough firepower to kill that mutant. Now, before you do that, first thing it does, the mutant hits you every time. So the mutant's just going to automatically do armor damage to you equal to the number next to his crossed sword. So if this mutant's got 2, I got to discard 2 blue armor cubes, right? If I cannot discard enough armor, if I don't have enough armor cubes, first of all, if I have no armor cubes, I can't initiate combat. Just can't. If I at least have some armor cubes, I can go into combat. But if I have to remove more armor cubes than I have, right, I will take a damage. It's called, I forget which resource it's called. Oh yeah, hull damage token. So one of the stats I can track is hull damage, and I would move hull damage up on my little resource tracking board 1 point for every ammo thing I couldn't block. Now, what's interesting about these things is there are 3 air quote resources on the resource board that are negative. They are bad for you to get. One of them is hull damage. One of them is failing to pay your taxes and being in debt. And the other one is getting radiation. More about those in a little bit. But basically, you don't want to get in a situation where you're taking hull damage. You can repair it, but it's kind of a pain. You're going to be wasting activations to do it. So try not to do that. So anyway, back to combat. Super simple. The monster's going to attack you for some amount of armor damage. You're going to remove those cubes. And then you're going to fight back against the monster. And again, if you're playing the base game, all you do is decide how many weapons you're going to be able to activate. Because you can have multiple weapons on your mech. You got to pay the energy and ammo cost for each weapon you're going to fire. And then if the total damage of your weapons equals or exceeds the defensive value of the monster slain, huzzah, and you take the monster token and you put it next to your mech. Because at the very end of the round, and not until the end of the round, we collect the rewards on the back of the monster token. Now, it's a little fuzzy in the game rules whether or not you're allowed to look at the back of your monster token and see the rewards, because they're not always the same. We play that we don't look at it until the very end round, just to kind of make it fun and add a little excitement, but you could if you want to. One thing you should know is a good rule of thumb: the more powerful the monster, i.e. the more damage it takes and deals, the cooler rewards on the back. So you don't always just get one DNA from the monster. You might get several. You might also get some coin revenue, some money. You might get some other things back there too. So fighting monsters is very, very lucrative. But it also costs you resources because you can imagine you've just burnt some ammo, some armor, and some energy probably in fighting this monster, right? And as you might have put together from my description here, depending on how you load out your mech, you can probably get some low damage weapons that don't really require a lot of energy or ammo. So you could go ahead and maybe fight multiple monsters, because one of the interesting things about this game is one of the spots where you can put your spaceship is actually on your own map, player mat. And if you put your spaceship on this one particular spot, it allows you to recall your mech, and you're basically going to get another activation this round with your mech, but you're going to lose one of your starship activations because you're placing it here to bring your mech back, right? This is a neat trick because you could basically go in early, fight a monster, recall your ship, and then recall your mech, and then send your mech back out again to fight another round. Now, the only thing that prevents you from doing this every turn is the resources required to re-equip your mech, right? Because before you go back into battle, you're going to want to restock some of those energy cubes and restock some of those armor cubes, unless maybe you fought a weedy monster and you absorb that damage, you can fight another weedy monster. So one of the strategies is, I'm going to go after small monsters, I'm going to kill a lot of them. Another one of the strategies, but I'm not going to cost me a lot of resources. Another strategy could be, I'm going to be a heavy hitter. I'm going to go after the big dudes, but when I do that, I'm going to have some challenges ahead of me. One of them is, I'm going to take a lot of damage, so I'm going to have to repair in terms of armor, and I'm going to have to maybe reload. Maybe it's going to burn a lot of energy and ammo, so I'm going to have to reload that as well. And so I'm going to spend some cycles doing that. How do you reload all that stuff? Well, of course, there are planets in the galaxy you can put your ships or your mechs on that allow you to restock the various colored cubes. There are also cool upgrades you can get that allow you to take actions once a round as on bonus actions to sort of do some self-repair. And I've seen some really cool combination of sort of game engines where people can kind of attack, auto repair the mech one round and go back again. So there's some really neat, based on some of the upgrades, there's some really neat sort of cycles you can get into and different play styles you can develop that are a lot of fun, that are really going to be influenced by the pilot you got, the particular mech you got, and then the circumstances of where the aliens show up. So that's really the basics of combat. Now, as you might imagine, you're thinking to yourself, if you're like me and you like a little dice in your life and you're like, man, that's interesting, Russ, but I don't like that it's just stat. Like, it's just like, I can't, there's no luck, right? Well, the good news is the new ways to hunt makes this game really a lot more fun from my perspective. So the big change here is the new ways to hunt comes with a bunch of dice. It comes with a whole tile that locks on the other side of your mech. So your player mech, Matt, actually gets bigger. It gets a third bigger because you got the pilot on one side, you got the mech sort of, what looks like it's sort of 50-50, like pilot then mech. But with this new expansion, it's pilot, mech, and then another whole tile thing that's just as big as the pilot side. And this gives you everything you know about the rerolls. You get your reroll energy cubes, but it also gives you some cool stuff you can do with dice. So how the dice work is when you go into combat, the monster itself always does the same amount of damage to you. It doesn't roll any dice. So the monster just hits you for whatever its damage value is, and you still take that armor value. However, when you attack the monster, when you activate a weapon, instead of just doing the damage on the numbers of your weapon, instead the damage value of your weapon actually just indicates now how many dice you roll. So if the gun's got a 2 on it, you'd roll 2 dice. If you're going to fire a second gun that's got a 5 on it, now you're rolling 7 dice, right? And when you roll these dice, they have different results on them. There is a 1 burst side, there's a 2 burst side, and then there's also a skull side, right? The skull is basically a miss. But interestingly, you always want to get 1 skull. More about that in a second. The bursts are more important. So you want to be able to add up your bursts and equal or exceed the monster's defense value, and then you kill the monster. But of course, you're not really going to know if you're going to roll that. And so as a good rule of thumb, you kind of want to always roll as many dice as the monster has on defense, but you never know, right? And you can also spend, you get a new resource, these orange reroll cubes that they're called batteries. You can spend them to reroll some of your attack dice to try to get to that number. So you're going to want to have those things ready to go as well. So really interesting, sort of changes the game up a little bit there. You can actually fight a monster and fail now, because under the original game, you always know the outcome. And so you either don't fight the guy because you know you won't win, or you do. In this case, you can actually roll against him and fail. And if that happens, the bad news of it is you don't actually kill the monster. It stays where it was, but you still take all the resource losses. So you take the damaged armor, you take whatever you spent on energy and ammo, and now you're no better for it, right? So it's really a bummer when that goes wrong, especially against big monsters. So there's a little bit of a press your luck here. Let's say your mech has got like 4 weapons on it. Do you fire only 2 of the weapons to save the resources and roll the dice and kind of count on luck? Or do you want to kind of make it a bit more of a sure thing and fire the 2 more weapons, which would make your dice pool almost certainly deadly, but now you're going to be spending more resources maybe you didn't need to do. So I like this because it adds a little bit of a press your luck element to it, and I just like dice. The other mechanic that it does add, though, which makes fighting even cooler, is there is a little spot on that new sideboard that goes on your mat that has a picture of the skull die. And if you manage to have a combat where you roll a skull die at the end, you can take that skull die and put it on that sideboard, and there's all these little icons all around this skull die. And you can then basically choose after the combat which of those resources or icons you're going to activate because you had that skull. You just slide it over to show it. There's some cool stuff in here. One of them is it allows you to exchange one of your DNA tokens that you won from an earlier battle with a different colored DNA token. So this allows you to go ahead and start to trade out, and you got to do a better job of getting the missions you need. There's another one in there that lets you recharge one of your cubes. There's another one in there that I think lets you, discard a radiation token. There's all kinds of cool stuff in there. So you can go ahead and do a lot of cool things there as well. And I think it just adds a little more to the game and the combat. So that's pretty much the whole game, really. You're going to be bouncing around the different planets. As I mentioned, there are some negative resources that you will end up collecting by accident or on purpose. So one of them, as I mentioned, is hull damage. So if your armor if you ever take more damage from a monster battle than you have armor, you have to increase your hull damage resources, which is a bad thing. And you're going to take -3 victory points at the end of the game for every hull damage you have above 0. So do not collect hull damage if you can avoid it. Actually, all 3 resources have the same bad effect. You take -3 victory points for every point of bad resource. And the 3 bad resources are, it's kind of easy to remember, but it's kind of not. So 2 of the bad resources are red tokens. One of them is the hull damage, which looks like an explosion. That's easy to remember. The other one is debt. So the mechanic for ending the game here is actually there's a turn counter. And when you get to the last turn of the game ends, you count up victory points, you have a winner, right? But along the track on the turn counter, there is some iconography that cause things to happen. Okay. So a couple of those things. One of them is there are a couple places on the track where there's a big dollar sign and a spaceship. And when those happen, you have to pay coins to the government. You pay taxes on all the ships you have flying around. So keep an eye on those because that's going to be expensive. And there's also an icon that gives every player an extra ship, right? It's worker placement. So it's kind of like Lords of Waterdeep. It kind of kicks in at the halfway point of the game. So you're going to get more worker placement. You're going to pay for it though. So keep an eye on those and make sure you have enough coins for there. For every ship you can't cover, you're going to take a debt token. And these debt tokens, brutal because they're also -3 per token or per resource you've achieved there. The third resource that's bad is radiation. Some of the planets have iconography on them, so when you land on those planets, you will take a radiation token. Now, radiation also is -3 victory points at the end of the game. However, there are some upgrades and certain pilots that actually like radiation or upgrades that prevent radiation, or even there's things you can do to make radiation actually a positive at the end of the game. So there are nuances to radiation, a little more than the other two, but hull damage and debt tokens are always bad, and they're actually the hardest things to get rid of. Radiation, there's quite a few ways in the game you can sort of vent radiation, so it's just more of an annoyance. But those other two, don't screw up and get heavy hull damage or debt tokens. You will be nuked. So really, the biggest recommendation I can make to new players is watch that turn track and make sure you have enough credits for when the taxes come for those spaceships. So get to those planets that give you credits early on and make sure you have enough cash flowing around, or do enough battles to get that as well. You usually get pretty good credits for killing beasties. So that's pretty much the whole game. At the end of the very end of the game, there's a nice little you flip over your quick reference cards, and there's actually a victory point tracking system there that you can go through and do. And so it just walks you through the whole victory point tracking process, and you figure out who is the big winner there. We really enjoyed this game. It's interesting because I wasn't sure about it. I mean, I was excited to back it. I love the theme of it. I love the idea of it. I love Pacific Rim. I love Monster Apocalypse. This is like kaiju in space. You know, what's not to love? Plus, you got giant mechs. So if you're a Battletech or anime fan, what's also kind of fun, I will say the additional thing I got when I backed the Kickstarter, you get 3 boxes of stuff. I mentioned the 2 boxes that are available to the general public now in most stores. So Galaxy Hunters and New Ways to Hunt. In my opinion, you'd need to get New Ways to Hunt. If you like dice, you got to get that. If you're not a big dice person, it's no big deal. The other thing though that New Ways to Hunt does is that's it. That's all it does. It just adds dice and it adds a couple more. I think there's one more robot and one more pilot type in there. The other big thing that came from the Kickstarter was another box of just more variety for mechs and more variety for pilots, which unfortunately you won't have if you didn't back the Kickstarter. It doesn't make the game any less fun. There is a non-IP infringing giant Optimus Prime looking robot that is doesn't transform, but looks kind of like him. He was a Kickstarter exclusive. But what's kind of fun about these robots is you're going to see inspiration from all of your favorite giant robots somewhere in there. So good times. I would say what's interesting about this game is Craig generally doesn't like worker placement. He really enjoyed this. 2 of our D&D players, John and Joe, who you've heard on the D&D podcast segments, they loved this game. I think we played it John's played it 3 or 4 times now. My oldest daughter, Rose, really liked it. It's a lot of fun. It captures the theme well, and you feel like the fighting is a big part of the game, which is interesting because it's really just, at its heart, it's just worker placement. It really is, but it feels good. And you definitely feel like you're building a cool mech character. Our only critique is that the mech model doesn't really ever match the way you load your mech out. So in other words, there's a plastic mech that matches the art on every player mat. However, for example, one of them might have a giant battle axe, but you could choose to equip that very mech with 2 pistols. And that's really going to depend on the pilot. So it's interesting that the shape of the mech or the way the mech is loaded in the plastic will probably almost never match what you actually equip your mech, because that's more driven by the pilot. So we've taken to sort of switching out our miniatures to more match whatever we load them out with weapons. If it's giant gun or a melee weapon or whatever, just because it's more fun. But at the end of the day, you got these cool models, you got these cool mats, the artwork's awesome. It's a nit. And I will say too, we were pleasantly surprised with how well the resource boards worked. We all at the beginning were like, this is hinky. And by the end we're like, that works really well. It's way faster than the traditional piles of tokens. So we really enjoyed this game. Craig also really liked it, and he's not a big fan of worker placement games, but now I've got him 2 in a row. I got him on Dune Imperium, which he really enjoyed, and now I got him on Galaxy Hunters. So I think it's the really cool Ameritrash, I hate that term, but it's been around forever now, but the American style theme of over the top crazy theme on, heavy combat theme on top of Really, really slick, great graphic design, great iconography, great simple mechanics of worker placement. It's an easy game to teach, an easy game to understand, but it's a lot of great replayability in here, all this stuff. So I'm going to say, for a D6G rating, how would this stack up? Well, let's see here. Well, I'm going to say, I guess I should describe the patent pending D6G rating system in the style of a giant kaiju. 4+. That's it. Well, the normal way we describe this is it's what you would need to roll on a D6 for the average gamer to enjoy the game. So a 4+ would mean about half the gamers would like it. A 2+ would mean most gamers would like it, right? So what I'm thinking about Galaxy Hunters, I think it's a 3+ for most folks. I have not had to play with anyone yet who hasn't enjoyed it. My daughters, my friends, Craig, who's not a Eurogamer. I'm going to say it's just a straight up 3+. You're going to enjoy this game. I might even give it a reroll if you're a fan of giant robots or giant biomutant monsters. It's just a really great way to build. Also, if you like character building, like I know a lot of folks do like the idea of a development or sort of creating something during the course of the game. Role Player does a great job with this as well. That's definitely a big part of this game and a big part of the fun. Because it's the weird part about it is it's not tactical combat, right? There's no like controlling anything on the board. There's one other element to the game I totally forgot to mention, which is just thought about controlling the board. So there's also some other events as you're progressing on the turn counter that will cause the monsters to not just stay in their little corner of the universe on their little, and that's literal, by the way, because their planet's literally in the corner of the table, corner of the board. But there's some events that will cause them to actually go out and invade planets. And if they do that, that planet is your mech can't use the planet unless he goes and fights and slays the mutant. You can still put your ships in orbit, but it costs you 2 ships in one placement to use the planet instead of 1. So it's really very expensive. So when those mutants start going out into the world, to the galaxy, it becomes sort of a problem, but you get kind of excited about it because you get to go kill the mutant and then also activate the planet. So it can be a big win when that sort of happens. And so then activation order really matters as well. So there it is, Galaxy Hunters. I'm going to say it's 3+ with a reroll if you're a fan of giant mecha robots fighting big mutant monsters. So hope you enjoyed that one. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time on the D6 Generation.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@the d6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening and happy gaming.